Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Gary Parker. Today we have episode 377 for May 20th, 2024. Got a news show for you this week. Unfortunately, most of the news this week isn't great, but also some confusing news stories that I want to make sure we kind of dig into a little bit, get to the bottom of. Some of the reporting, as is often the case, was a little bit breathless, a little bit hair on fire, a little bit of the sky is falling kind of stuff that I would like to address. Real quick, before we get to that, update all your Apple devices. Apple just released a bunch of software updates with some new features, one of which we'll talk about today, but also with some security fixes. So basically, if you have an Apple anything, iPhone, iPad, Mac, whatever, go ahead and look for updates and get those updated if you don't have automatic updates turned on. Even if you do, look for a little notice saying you've got an update and make sure you get those applied. Also, if you are using Chrome, and I wish you wouldn't, as was evidenced by my recent railing against using Chrome. But if you are, get it updated. There's some actively exploited bugs in the Chrome browser. Make sure you update Chrome right away, or, maybe switch to something else. Which reminds me, I wanted to talk really quickly about my advice for using Firefox. So I gave my reasons for why I wanted you to use Firefox over Chrome. One of the main ones being that of all the other privacy-respecting browser alternatives, Firefox is really one of the few that doesn't use the Chromium engine, which means it's not based on something that Google owns. And they're honestly struggling. They've been losing market share for years to Chrome and the Chromium-based browsers like Edge and Opera and Brave and some of the others. And so one of the main reasons I had said to support Firefox and Mozilla, the maker of Firefox, is that we want competition. We want diversity. And if we want that to survive, we need to support them. Now, since I posted that, I got some blowback on social media. A lot of people supported this, but some people didn't. And here's the thing. So nobody's perfect. Firefox and Mozilla in particular have had some financial issues, and some people would blame the fact that they're, for example, paying their CEO way too much money and not spending their money wisely. That all may be true. But again, nobody's perfect, and if they go under, will any of that matter? I don't know. I suppose you could blame it potentially on poor financial management. But nevertheless, I personally think we should be supporting Firefox, if nothing else, by using the browser. And that's honestly probably the best way to support them for the average person, is just use the browser, get other people to use it too, and get that install base up. And I hope they can come up with some way to finance themselves. Another problem with Firefox, which honestly is a problem with Apple as well, is that Google pays them a lot of money to make them the default search engine. In both cases, you can change that to whatever you want. So again, it's really hard to find anybody who's perfect, start casting stones in glass houses, that kind of thing. If we do that, I'm not sure anything would be left standing. So it's not to be an apologist. It's not to whitewash this stuff. I know these are some real issues. But the other thing I will say about this is, if you do post stuff like that on social media, like as a reply to something I post, honestly, I generally don't get involved. If, I don't want to get into flame wars. I don't want to get into a lot of back and forth. I'm not really big into conflict personally anyway. So if you do post stuff like that on social media, I'm not likely to reply. I generally don't engage on things like that. Just FYI. Okay, so we've got a new show for you this week. We're going to talk about yet another large-scale ransomware attack against a medical firm. Actually, we're going to talk about a couple of those today. CISA is warning about some actively exploited D-Link router vulnerabilities. There was an interesting article in Ars Technica about somebody who put a cool smart control device on their new tankless water heater and found that it had basically no real security. And that was due to an API, an application programming interface, that didn't have proper authentication, which will blend right into another story from Bleeping Computer about how a Dell API was used to steal about 50 million customer records in a data breach. Nissan is telling their employees that about 53,000 of their social security numbers have been exposed. There's a new macOS malware called Cuckoo that will give us a good opportunity to talk about malware on Macs again and how to prevent it. Proton Mail is in the news again due to complying with a perfectly legitimate court order that managed to get an activist fingered by the Spanish government. Whenever this happens, it brings the people out of the woodwork that says, see, I told you so, you can't trust Proton. So, obviously it's a lot more nuanced than that. And as usual in cases like this, it generally comes down to the person being identified as not using proper OpSec or operational security. So I'll get into that and kind of explain what's going on there. And then there was this other story from Ars Technica, and they've done this a few times recently, and it's really kind of bugging me because I generally like Ars Technica. But it's another one of those kind of sensationalistic articles that really, I think, went a little bit too far, basically saying that there's this new attack on VPNs, which exposes VPN traffic, but it's not really new and it's not really as bad as they say it is. So there's a lot of nuance there, and I want to cover that today. Then I do have some good news. Vermont and Maryland have both passed data privacy bills, which are fantastic. And Google and Apple have worked together to create an anti-stalking or anti-malicious tracking technology that they have standardized and released on both of their phones, and have worked with other vendors like Tile to prevent people from being maliciously tracked using these Bluetooth tracking devices like AirTags. And that was one of the new features that was released in iOS 17.5, which just came out, along with the recent update for Android as well. So that's great that they worked together and did this. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then finally, for my tip of the week, and this was triggered by another podcast I was listening to, where somebody had looked at a bunch of data breached PIN codes, like 4-digit ATM pins, that sort of thing, and did some analysis on how people pick their PIN codes. And I think that was fascinating. So my tip of the week is how to choose a PIN code. So that's what's on the docket for today. Let's get right to it. All right, first up, this is from Bleeping Computer, one of a couple we've got from them today. And it's about an Australian prescription vendor. Electronic prescription provider MediSecure in Australia has shut down its website and phone lines following a ransomware attack believed to originate from a third-party vendor. The incident has impacted personal and health information of individuals, but the extent remains unclear at this time. Operating since 2009, MediSecure provides digital tools to healthcare professionals to manage and dispense medications to patients. The company has issued millions of e-scripts via its private and state-backed eRx systems. Until November of 2009, it was one of the 2 paperless script networks in Australia. Today, the company announced that it has been indirectly impacted by a cybersecurity incident on one of its service providers that has resulted in a data breach. And this is a quote statement from the company, quote, MediSecure has identified a cybersecurity incident impacting the personal and health information of individuals. We have taken immediate steps to mitigate any potential impact on our systems, unquote. The organization has informed key regulators in Australia, including the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, and is working with the National Cybersecurity Coordinator, or the NCSC, to mitigate the impact of the cyber attack. In a short announcement, the Australian NCSC said that, quote, a commercial health information organization reported being the victim of a large-scale ransomware data breach incident, unquote. Although MediSecure did not mention a ransomware attack, the Australian Financial Review and ABC report from the company behind the NCSC's announcement was MediSecure. The NCSC noted that the investigation is too early of a stage to be able to share any useful details about the impact this cybersecurity incident has on the Australian population. So yeah, this was kind of coming to the news as I was going to air, so I don't have a whole lot more information than that. But if you're in Australia and you use MediSecure, you need to be on the lookout for identity theft and phishing scams and the usual data breach protocols for trying to stay safe. Next up, this is from Hacker News. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, on Thursday added 2 security flaws impacting D-Link routers to its Known Exploited Vulnerability, or KEV, catalog, based on evidence of active exploitation. There are currently no details on how these shortcomings are exploited in the wild, but federal agencies have been urged to apply vendor-provided mitigations by June 6th of 2024. It's worth noting that one of the bugs affects legacy D-Link products that have reached end-of-life or EOL status, necessitating that organizations still using them retire and replace the devices. The development comes as the SSD Secure Disclosure Team revealed unpatched security issues in the DIR X4860 routers that could enable remote unauthenticated attackers to access the HNAP port. And HNAP stands for Home Network Administration Protocol, which I wasn't familiar with. I had to look up, but it sounds like it's more of a network device management thing used by ISPs to manage a whole bunch of devices. But anyway, that's not super crucial to this, so let me keep going. Allow them to access the port in order to obtain elevated privileges and run commands as root, which is like administrator. This is a quote from that. It says, by combining an authentication bypass with command execution, the device can be completely compromised. Adding that the issues impact routers running firmware version, and you can look this up, you're not going to remember this, but it's basically the firmware version starts with the model name and then goes firmware version 1.04B03. D-Link has since acknowledged the issue in a bulletin of its own, stating a fix is pending release and under development, and it described the vulnerability as a case of LAN-side unauthenticated command execution flaw. LAN being local area network, in other words, the inside your home network, not from outside, which would be the WAN side or the wide area network. All right, so first of all, if you happen to have one of these particular D-Link routers, really honestly, when these kind of things happen, I would take a look at any other routers in its class. In other words, other versions of this router that might be similar, and make sure you get them updated. But here's the general takeaway for all of you. Please learn how to update your home routers and how to keep them up to date. If your router has an automatic update feature, be sure that it's enabled. If it doesn't, set a periodic reminder for yourself to go and check for updates, software updates on your router, and make sure that you get them applied. Like I would do it at least monthly. So what that really means is you should probably get a router that has automatic updates so you don't have to do that. If, however, your router is old, like some of the ones mentioned in this article, and is no longer getting updates and they are end of life, which is the marketing term for we're not supporting this anymore, it's really time to replace your router. And if you got your router, if the router in question is from your internet service provider or your ISP, I would buy your own router because you want to have full control over that router. I really don't recommend that people use the router from their ISP because that really gives them a view into your entire home network. Sure, they can see all the traffic that comes in and out of your house already, unless you have it encrypted, which most stuff today is. But if they own the router, they could actually view the traffic within your home network, and that just creeps me out. Plus, I'm a control freak. I want to be able to control my router. So the other thing to realize that in situations like this is if this really is a LAN side attack, what that means is for you to be vulnerable to this, it would have to be like a rogue device in your home network, like a really insecure IoT device, or maybe a guest device that's infected, like some friend comes over and they've got a laptop, or they bring their some IoT device over to your house to put on your network for some reason. If it's compromised, what these compromised devices will often do is poke around the network and look for vulnerabilities, and the big target is always going to be your home router. So if there are known vulnerabilities in your router and a rogue device can sniff that out, it will immediately try to infect your router. So bottom line, it is extremely important that we keep our routers up to date and secure. All right, moving on. This is from Ars Technica again. All right, next up, this is from Ars Technica, and it's the story of a IoT water heater controller with horrible security. And I've edited a lot of this down. If you want to read the full article, as always, go to the show notes. The hot water took too long to come out at the tap. This is what I was trying to solve. I did not intend to discover that. For a while there, water heaters like mine have been open to anybody. That, with some API tinkering and an email address, a bad actor could possibly set its temperature and make it run constantly. That's just how it happened. All right, now this person goes on to explain at length why somebody might want to get a tankless water heater. If you're not familiar, a tankless water heater basically heats water on demand. So instead of having a big reservoir of water that it tries to keep hot so it's ready to go when you need it, it actually just, when it feels a pull on the hot water line, it actually turns up either an electrical element or a gas element or something and heats the water immediately. It's kind of like a reverse radiator. And so it heats the water on demand as opposed to doing it all the time and trying to keep it hot and waiting for you. Now, what this person found out is that that's all well and good, and you can save a lot of money that way, but it can take time for that hot water to get to your tap. And so some of these systems have a built-in recirculator, which actually tries to kind of keep the hot water fresh at your tap, I guess. Anyway, this guy found an IoT device that let him do that so that he could, with an app, control this recirculator to basically preheat the water in his hot water lines so he didn't have to wait. These are first world problems that we have now. Anyway, so jumping into the article, he says, I now had an app that could start recirculation. I could get my shower hot while still in bed, or get started on the dinner dishes from the couch. And yet pulling out my phone whenever I wanted hot water felt like trading one inconvenience for another. Being a home automation nerd and thereby a home assistant enthusiast, I searched for a better way. I found an unofficial Rinnai, that's R-I-N-N-A-I component, and installed it. And then I had real control. I could set recirculation to run on whatever schedule I wanted, triggered by anything, at any temperature. If I wanted to start hot water flowing on winter mornings as soon as the bedroom lights came on, but only if the moon was in Aquarius, I could do that. And I'm not joking. The future felt warm, but not too warm, and on demand. If everything worked great, why am I still writing? Because I contacted the coders behind the integration thinking I might write up my fun little hot water quicker adventure. Maybe I'd learn more about what motivates the folks doing this useful work for free. This added a surprising second and surreal third part to my one-play act. I emailed and spoke by phone with integration author Brad Barber, who, like me, wanted to make his Rinnai brand tankless water heater better. The first version of Rinnai's official app, Control-R, left a big gap in function and convenience, Barber said. Only one account could be signed in. A Google integration basically never really worked, he said, and you could only set up timed schedules, not automate. Barber, wanting to craft his own solution, started watching the app's network traffic to see if he could do better. The calls that Control-R made to Rinnai's servers were very basic, Barber said. Digging into the undocumented API calls, Barber saw something he didn't think was real. You needed only a registered email address to retrieve information, or change settings on a connected water heater. Daniel Dulitz, the other GitHub user, had hashed things out with Barber in a public GitHub issue on the project in a thread titled, How Does Authentication Work? On June 29, 2021, Dulitz asked the core question about Rinnai's app. So it appears that this is an unauthenticated endpoint, and absolutely anyone on the internet can read all the information about me and my water heater, and also set new temperatures for me at any time, without needing to know my password, just the API key, which is in this code base and is the same for everyone. The two prepared a security advisory for Rinnai, which I have seen. It notes that while the technologies the system uses are quote-unquote appropriate and defensible, they are seemingly configured to allow reading and setting without requiring access tokens or keys. And this is a quote from their advisory. Knowing only your email address, I can set your water heater's temperature to very cold or scaldingly hot. I can put it into recirculation mode continuously so that it uses lots of gas. I can see your home street address that you have entered into your Control-R app when you registered your water heater, it read. Another coder, Dustin Clark, who developed a Rinnai controller for the Homebridge platform, arrived independently at the same conclusions and concerns as Barber and Dulitz. And then Clark said, quote, I can tell you with 100% certainty that the API for setting state did not require an auth token until sometime around August 23rd of 2022, unquote. Noting a commit he made to his plugin to start properly handing over a token. Rinnai closed that gap, which necessitated this fix, which was the comment on the commit. Mark Ostrowski, head of engineering at Checkpoint Software, noted that appliance vendors working with open source operating systems can design, build, and ship devices that have vulnerabilities by the time they arrive in a customer's home. Patching and updating those systems is often difficult and typically left to the customer to initiate. This is the quote from Clark, quote, the increase in IoT security needs to be adopted in the home as we become more reliant on smart devices, unquote. Unauthorized access through a product's app or smart features is something researchers at Consumer Reports have seen, but rarely, according to a representative there. It's typically the domain of startups or smaller white label brands seeking to have a seemingly high-tech product on the market, but without robust quality assurance for testing implementations. So this comes down to these things called APIs, or Application Programming Interfaces, which are great. They're really powerful. They're wonderful. We don't want to get rid of them. We just have to make them more secure. So if you've ever wondered how an app on your phone can control a device in your house, or going to some web page somewhere can control a device in your house, these are through what's called APIs. And so they allow these devices to talk to each other in a standardized format, which somebody defines, usually the designer of the product. And these APIs, these connections, these communication channels should require secure authentications, but sometimes they don't. Let me read this next article and I'll have a little bit more to say on that. This is from Bleeping Computer. The threat actor behind the recent Dell data breach revealed they scraped information of 49 million customer records using a partner portal API they accessed as a fake company. Yesterday, Bleeping Computer reported that Dell had begun to send notifications warning customers that their personal data was stolen in a data breach. This data breach contained customer order data, including warranty information, service tags, customer names, installed locations, customer numbers, and order numbers. The threat actor called Menelik told Bleeping Computer this morning that they were able to steal the data after discovering a portal for partners, resellers, and retailers that could be used to look up order information. Menelik says he could access the portal by registering multiple accounts under fake company names and had access within 2 days without verification. And this is a quote from this, I guess, hacker named Menelik, says, "It's very easy to register as a partner. You just fill in an application form. You enter company details, reason you want to become a partner, and then they just approve you and give you access to this quote-unquote authorized portal. I just created my own accounts in this way. The whole process takes 24 to 48 hours. Once they gained access to the portal, Menelik told Bleeping Computer they had created a program that generated 7-digit service tags and submitted them to the portal page starting in March to scrape the returned information, which basically sounds like a brute force attack. These service tags were probably 7 digits long, so they just said, well, let me just start generating 7-digit tags and ask for information and see what I get. As the portal reportedly did not include any rate limiting, the threat actor claims they could harvest the information of 49 million customer records by generating 5,000 requests per minute for 3 weeks without Dell blocking the attempts. Easy-to-access APIs have become a massive weakness for companies in recent years, with threat actors abusing them to scrape sensitive data and sell them to other threat actors. In 2021, threat actors abused a Facebook API bug to link phone numbers to over 500 million accounts. This data was leaked almost for free on a hacking forum, only requiring an account and paying $2 to download it. Later that year, in December, threat actors exploited a Twitter API bug to link millions of phone numbers and email addresses to Twitter accounts, which were then sold on hacking forums. More recently, a Trello API flaw was exploited last year to link an email address to 15 million accounts, which were, once again, put up for sale on a hacking forum. While all of these incidents involved scraping of data, they were allowed due to the ease of access to APIs and the lack of proper rate limiting for a number of requests that can be made per second from the same host. Okay, so again, let me just say, APIs are powerful and useful things. We're not going to get rid of them, and we shouldn't get rid of them. This is how different systems communicate with each other, and they can do very powerful and wonderful things. And it's just how a lot of things work. However, many of them just lack basic security protections, either, a really good authentication mechanism or some sort of vetting of the people who are authorized to use these APIs. And then, like this article says, rate limiting these things so that somebody can't just pound these APIs with requests and download a ton of data without, raising some sort of a red flag somewhere or just getting cut off automatically. I've used these kind of APIs myself all the time. They really are powerful things. They just have to be secured. Gee, it's almost like we need some sort of law or regulation making these things secure or having liability if they're not. All right, let's move on. This is from Info Security Magazine. Nissan has revealed that over 53,000 of its North America employees have had their personal data breached following a ransomware attack on its systems in late 2023. The information accessed by the threat actor are employees' names and other personal identifiers in combination with their social security numbers. The Japanese-based car manufacturer made the disclosure in a data breach notification filed to the Office of the Maine Attorney General on May 15th of 2024. The notification explained that Nissan North America became aware of a targeted attack against its external VPN when a ransomware actor shut down some of its systems and demanded a ransom payment. The firm said it successfully remediated the attack in conjunction with external cybersecurity professionals, and law enforcement were notified of the incident. Nissan then informed employees of the attack at a town hall meeting on December 5th of 2023 and the possibility that certain employee personal information could have been accessed. Nissan North America subsequently discovered that the attacker had accessed data from a number of its local and network shares, but did not encrypt any data or render any of NNA's systems inoperable. On February 28th of 2024, it was found that this data included personal information relating to 53,038 current and former NNA employees, including their social security numbers. No employee financial data was accessed in the attack, and Nissan has not said whether it paid a ransom to the attackers. There is currently no indication that any of the access information has been misused or was the intended target of the attackers, though why else would they take it? Anyway, however, there is the potential for malicious actors to use the stolen information for identity theft and follow-up social engineering attacks on NNA employees. Nissan is offering staff a complimentary credit monitoring service to help identify and resolve any cases of identity theft. It is also providing proactive fraud assistance to help with any questions that affected individuals might have, or in the event that they become a victim of fraud. So anyway, another week, another data breach. Unlike the previous breach, this involved people's social security numbers, which is a real problem here in the US. And my take on this really is that the real thing is we really need to change how we use our social security numbers here. They were never supposed to be secrets. They weren't supposed to be these special identifiers that follow us for life that somehow no one is ever supposed to know, and yet so many people ask us to use them for our records, usually, financial and medical and some of the things that are most private. And unlike any other kind of username or password, you can't change them. The Social Security Administration in the U.S. really does not like giving out new Social Security numbers. They will under extreme circumstances, usually if you have been a victim of identity theft. And even then, I think you've got to go through a lot of hoops. It is really difficult to change your Social Security number. We just need to stop using our Social Security numbers as this master key for all of this super private information and access to credit and loans and financial stuff. I mean, we're doing it wrong. That's what I'm trying to say. So we should really be having different IDs for all of these things, so it's not one ID to rule them all. And if we do that, there should be easier to change those if for some reason they get out or are breached. And we just need to stop using this one magic number for these purposes. But in the meantime, freeze your credit. I talked about this recently. If you go to firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com, you'll find my recent blog entry on this with all the details. There's just no reason not to do it. It doesn't cost any money, including thawing it and refreezing it. There's just no reason not to do it. Unless for some reason you're constantly getting new credit, I just see no other downside to freezing your credit. And even then, thawing your credit for short periods of time is very easy to do now. So check out that article for more information. All right, next up, this is from Tom's Guide. It's about a new macOS malware called Cuckoo. Hackers are using a new Mac malware to launch attacks against both newer Macs running Apple Silicon as well as older Intel-based Macs. As reported by the Hacker News, the malware in question has been dubbed Cuckoo by security researchers at the device management company Kanji. Besides targeting both newer and older Macs, what sets Cuckoo apart is that it behaves like a cross between an info stealer malware and spyware. In a blog post, Kanji's Adam Kohler and Christopher Lopez explained that they came across a previously undetected malicious binary on the malware tracking site VirusTotal with the name Dump Media Spotify Music Converter. They then looked up the program's name online and found that it was being distributed from a site called dumpmedia.com, which offers multiple apps to help users pirate music from streaming services by converting them into MP3 files. While the Cuckoo malware is currently being spread on music piracy sites, this campaign could easily be changed to distribute it through other fake apps. After downloading the Dump Media Spotify Music Converter app, the researchers discovered that it contained an application bundle. This is interesting, as normally, macOS apps just need to be dragged into the application folder. In contrast, this one encourages users to right-click on it and then click Open. The app found in this bundle was signed without a developer ID, which means that Apple's gatekeeper will try to stop it from running. However, if a user uses it to run on their computer manually, this process of right-clicking and saying run, the malware will then run its course. Just like the Mac Stealer malware, Cuckoo uses a script to display a fake password prompt to trick users into entering their system password. If the hackers behind the malware do get a victim's system password, they can then escalate the malware's privileges on the infected machine. Cuckoo then takes note of the apps installed on the new compromised Mac, takes screenshots, and harvests data from iCloud Keychain, Apple Notes, web browsers, crypto wallets, and apps like Discord, FileZilla, Steam, and Telegram. It's also worth noting that Cuckoo uses a technique called Launch Agent to establish persistence on an infected Mac. This way, even if you reboot your computer, the malware will still run the next time you turn your Mac on. Now, this is interesting. Check this out. Likewise, the malware checks to make sure that the targeted Mac isn't located in Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Russia, or Ukraine before it begins stealing sensitive data. As is often the case with other malware strains, Cuckoo is currently being spread on piracy sites. Besides being illegal and harmful to creators, pirating content online is usually a surefire way to end up with a nasty malware infection. While your Mac comes with built-in antivirus software in the form of Apple's X-Protect, you might also want to consider using one of the best Mac antivirus software solutions as well. These paid antivirus programs tend to receive updates more regularly, come with more features, and often give you access to extras like a VPN or a password manager. We could see the hackers behind this campaign come up with another way to distribute the new Cuckoo malware, like through phishing emails or malicious apps. For right now, though, if you avoid sites that offer a way to download music from streaming services, you should be safe. Okay, that's not true. Like this article just said, there are other ways to get these viruses too. But yes, going to sites that help you pirate movies and music and things like that is a classic way to get malware. But there are so many other ways as well. So a couple interesting things about this. First of all, if you ever get this sort of notice from an app installer, this should be an immediate red flag to you. If instead of just having it, especially on a Mac, drag the app into the applications folder, which as this article says is usually how you quote unquote install an app on a Mac. If instead it tells you, oh no, this is how you install this app, you right click on it and then you say open or run. That should still give you a pop-up saying, hey, this is something that's not signed, or are you sure you really want to do this? And again, that should be another warning that, that's not normal. These are ways that you can get around Apple's built-in protections against things like this, because you're basically manually saying, yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what I'm doing here. Shut up and let me do it. They're basically giving you the instructions that you would have to follow to do that, to run unauthorized or unsigned or otherwise unknown software on your Mac. But the other thing I thought was really interesting here, and this is something we've seen before, but I wanted to bring attention back to it, is that this malware doesn't run if it thinks that your computer is one of these countries that it just mentioned. So what they do to try to prevent that, and some people assume that the reason they do this is because the people that wrote this software, the people that wrote this malware, live in one of these countries, or have people that collaborate with them in some of these countries, and they don't want to accidentally infect themselves. And so they try to figure out where your computer is located. And oftentimes the way they do that, not just looking at like IP address location and things like that, they will actually check to see what keyboard you have installed. And for instance, if you have a Cyrillic keyboard, they won't infect you. So it's actually been postulated that this is a kind of a low-key way to protect your computer, is to install a second keyboard on your computer that is Cyrillic or Russian or one of these computers that might indicate to the malware that you are a quote-unquote friendly and to not infect you. This is not a foolproof method, but I just thought that was fascinating, and I thought I'd kind of bring that up since that was mentioned in this article. All right, next up, this is from Dark Reading. Healthcare provider Ascension, which operates 140 hospitals across 19 states, fell victim to a cyber attack that took down multiple essential systems, including electronic health records, or EHRs, the MyChart platform for patient communication, and certain medication and test ordering systems. The organization disclosed the attack on May 8th and said it is actively investigating it with internal and external advisors, prioritizing patient safety amid the disruption. According to a report in the Detroit Free Press, employees became aware of computer network issues on May 7th, which prompted a shutdown of the entire system. The provider has temporarily paused non-emergency medical procedures and appointments, and some hospitals are diverting emergency medical services. Patients were advised to bring relevant medical information to appointments due to system limitations. The organization has tapped incident response help from Mandiant for investigation and remediation efforts. It is unknown if any patient data was exposed in the attack. Ascension's cyber attack comes on the heels of a February ransomware attack on United Healthcare's Change Healthcare subsidiary, which caused chaos for days with outages across multiple hospitals and facilities. Mark Manglicmo, Manglicmot, Senior Vice President of Security Services for Arctic Wolf, says Ascension's cyber incident is a grim reminder that healthcare organizations are an incredibly hot target, and attacks on their infrastructure have consequences far beyond a ransom demand. He points out that healthcare organizations not only hold the keys to troves of personal and confidential information on patients, they also have massive networks of critical medical technology. Bad actors holding medical data hostage and turning off medical equipment can directly threaten thousands of lives, and the longer the intrusion persists, the greater the risk. Kurt Osborne, Director of Risk Management and Government at NCC Group, notes how healthcare is an easy target as well. And this is a quote, "Within hospitals, there are so many people and entry points to get information from that it can take a significant effort and cost to secure it all. No healthcare attacks are surprising, unfortunately. The industry is a priority target for attackers because of the value of the information." So yeah, just keeps happening. We've got to fix this, and this is real life or death kind of stuff. This isn't just about money. These are prime targets, they're juicy targets, and as this article says, there's just lots of attack surface there to go after. And these bad actors have been doing it over and over and over again. We really need to beef up our security for our healthcare systems and other critical infrastructure, and we really need to make them more resilient. Okay, so now moving on. This is a story you may have seen in the news, and this has happened every once in a while, and it brings up the exact same issues every single time. So let me just read this article, and this is about Proton Mail. Proton Mail has come under scrutiny for its role in a legal request involving the Spanish authorities and a member of the Catalan independence organization Democratic Tsunami. Proton Mail is a secure email service based in Switzerland, renowned for its commitment to privacy through end-to-end encryption and a strict no-logs policy. In 1921, Proton Mail faced controversy when it complied with a legal request that led to the arrest of a French climate activist. Under Swiss law, Proton Mail was compelled to collect and provide information on the individual's IP address to Swiss authorities, who then shared it with French police. The recent case involving the Spanish police this time highlights privacy concerns and the limits of encrypted communication services under national security pretexts, and brings a long-debated subject to the forefront once again. The core of the controversy stems from Proton Mail providing the Spanish police with the recovery email address associated with the Proton Mail account of an individual using the pseudonym Zuzu Rodener. This individual is suspected of being a member of Catalonia's police force and of using their internal knowledge to assist the Democratic Tsunami movement. Upon receiving the recovery email from Proton Mail, Spanish authorities further requested Apple, which I think owned the email, to provide additional details linked to that email, leading to the identification of the individual. This case is particularly noteworthy because it involves a series of requests across different jurisdictions and companies, highlighting the complex interplay between technology firms, user privacy, and law enforcement. The requests were made under the guise of anti-terrorism laws, despite the primary activities of the Democratic Tsunami involving protests and roadblocks, which raises questions about the proportionality and justification of such measures. Like before, Proton Mail's compliance with these requests is bound by Swiss law, which mandates cooperation with international legal demands that are formalized through proper channels, aka the Swiss court system here. This situation serves as a critical reminder of the importance of maintaining strict OpSec, or operational security. One should always be aware of the potential vulnerabilities that come with linking recovery information or secondary services like Apple accounts that may not have the same privacy safeguards as the primary encrypted email service. For users concerned about privacy, particularly those involved in sensitive or political activities, OpSec should be a top concern when using privacy tools. And here it gives 5 tips. It's advisable to 1. Avoid linking recovery emails or phone numbers that can directly tie back to the personal identities or primary business activities. 2. Consider using secondary disposable emails or virtual phone numbers that offer an additional layer of anonymity. 3. Use a good VPN service to hide your IP address whenever possible. And then it says parenthetically, failure to do this is what compromised a Proton Mail user in France who was arrested after police obtained IP logs. 4. Consider purchasing services using an anonymous payment method. And 5. Stay informed about the legal obligations and policies of communication service providers, especially regarding their compliance with international law enforcement requests. While Proton Mail and similar services offer substantial protections and end-to-end encryption on their platform, they are not immune to legal and governmental pressures. Users must navigate these waters carefully, balancing the need for security with the potential legal obligations of their service providers. And then Proton actually responded to this person, and they gave a comment. Proton said, quote, We are aware of the Spanish terrorism case involving alleged threats to the King of Spain, but as a general rule, we do not comment on specific cases. Proton has minimal user information, as illustrated by the fact that in this case, data obtained from Apple was used to identify the terrorism suspect. Proton provides privacy by default and not anonymity by default because anonymity requires certain user actions to ensure proper OpSec, such as not adding your Apple account as an optional recovery method. Note, Proton does not require adding a recovery address, as this information can, in theory, be turned over under Swiss court order, as terrorism is against the law in Switzerland. And that's the end of their comment. In an email to restore privacy, and I think I may have forgotten that's where this article came from. In an email to restore privacy, Proton also pointed out that adding a recovery email is optional. While this is true, we have also observed Proton Mail requiring a verification email address for account creation. As tested today, Proton requires a verification email when signing up through a VPN service and also Tor. In the verification box, Proton states that the email address, quote, will only be used for this one-time verification, unquote. Unlike a recovery email, this verification email presumably does not stay connected to the account. Okay, so I don't have a whole lot to add to this, but it's come up again, and whenever things like this come up, it brings certain people out of the woodwork that say, see, I told you, Proton's not really private. The classic is, they're just a honeypot. Get people believing they have privacy when in reality they don't, and they're working all the time with authorities in the background and handing over information left and right. Okay, so again, kind of back to my thing earlier. First of all, nobody's perfect. Second, email as a service requires you to have certain things not encrypted. For example, in order to deliver an email, you have to have the to address visible and unencrypted. To respond to that email, you have to have the from address unencrypted. There are IP addresses associated with all of these messages, and those are also, by nature of the internet, something that has to be there. Now, normally, Proton does not log these things. Apparently, I think in the French case, they were told they had to turn on IP logging for this user, and they are just complying with Swiss law. Even though Swiss has some pretty good privacy laws, when it comes down to, anti-terrorism or other sorts of law enforcement actions, they do have some responsibilities. So basically, a company like Proton and Signal just do everything they can to make sure that they have as little information to give over as possible. But there's still some metadata that they have access to and some that they may be required to turn over. So really, the onus then is on you, the user, to make sure that you have proper OpSec or operational security. And if you're operating at a level where this kind of stuff is that crucial to your well-being and personal safety, you need to be doing it right. And you need to be doing more than just saying, I use Proton Mail and I'm done, or I use Signal and I'm done. So I still recommend Proton and Signal. I know a lot of my colleagues in this space still recommend them as well. You just have to understand what you're doing, especially if the communications on these services might get you in legal or physical trouble. Every company has to comply with the laws of the country in which they operate, or, go out of business or be shut down by that country. Now, a lot of these companies will push back, like they'll make sure that there's a proper warrant, and they might challenge some of these warrants or subpoenas or whatever. And Proton has done that in the past. But, if they're served with a legal order and that's information they can provide, then they are duty bound to do so. So very often your security and privacy, especially if you want to really be anonymous, takes a lot more than just signing up for Signal or signing up for Proton. That you've got to be using, VPNs and Tor and cryptocurrency. And there's a lot more to your OpSec than just using these service providers. But for the vast, vast majority of us, we get everything we need from Signal and Proton, the privacy that we want, without really anonymity. We get the privacy and security that we want, and just by using these services. And most of us don't have to worry about situations like happened in this story. All right, next up, here's another story that was blown out of proportion as far as I'm concerned. It got a lot of press, and it's, like all these kind of stories, nuanced. And unfortunately, the nuances of this story are highly technical. So I'm going to read this expurgated version of this story from Ars Technica, and then I'm going to quickly read a response from Mulvad, who is a popular and a very good VPN provider, by the way. And then I'll give you my take on this. So let me first read part of this article from Ars Technica. Researchers have devised an attack against nearly all virtual private network applications that forces them to send and receive some or all traffic, network traffic, outside of the encrypted tunnel designed to protect it from snooping or tampering. TunnelVision, as the researchers have named their attack, largely negates the entire purpose and selling point of VPNs, which is to encapsulate incoming and outgoing internet traffic in an encrypted tunnel and to cloak the user's IP address. The researchers believe it affects all VPN applications when they're connected to a hostile network, and we're going to circle back to that, and that there are no ways to prevent such attacks except when the user's VPN runs on Linux or Android. And we'll explain what we mean by that here in a second. They also said their attack technique may have been possible since 2002 and may already have been discovered and used in the wild since then. The effect of TunnelVision is the victim's traffic is now decloaked and being routed through the attacker directly. A video demonstration explained, and there's a link there if you want to go see that. The attacker can read, drop, or modify the leaked traffic, and the victim maintains their connection to both the VPN and the internet. The attack works by manipulating the DHCP, or Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, server that allocates IP addresses to devices trying to connect to the local network. A setting known as Option 121 allows the DHCP server to override default routing rules that send VPN traffic through a local IP address that initiates the encrypted tunnel. By using Option 121 to route VPN traffic through the DHCP server, the attack diverts the data to the DHCP server itself. The attack can most effectively be carried out by a person who has administrative control over the network the target is connecting to. In that scenario, the attacker configures the DHCP server to use Option 121. It's also possible for people who can connect to the network as an unprivileged user to perform the attack by setting up their own rogue DHCP server. The attack allows some or all traffic to be routed through the unencrypted tunnel. In either case, the VPN application will report that all data is being sent through the protected connection. Any traffic that's diverted away from this tunnel will not be encrypted by the VPN, and the internet IP address viewable by the remote user will belong to the network the VPN user is connected to, rather than the one designated by the VPN app. Interestingly, Android is the only operating system that fully immunizes VPN apps from the attack because it doesn't implement Option 121. For all other operating systems, there are no complete fixes. When apps run on Linux, there's a setting that minimizes the effects, but even then, TunnelVision can be used to exploit a side channel that can be used to de-anonymize destination traffic and perform targeted denial of service attacks. Network firewalls can also be configured to deny inbound and outbound traffic to and from the physical interface. This remedy is problematic for two reasons. One, the VPN user connecting to the untrusted network has no ability to control the firewall, and two, it opens the same side channel present for, whatever. And then it says the most effective fixes are to run the VPN inside of a virtual machine whose network adapter isn't in bridge mode, or to connect the VPN to the internet through a Wi-Fi network of a cellular device. Okay. Before I give you my take on this, let me read what Mulvad said about this. So before I give you my take on this, let me read Mulvad's response. It was called Evaluating the Impact of TunnelVision. We evaluated the impact of the latest TunnelVision attack, and it gives us CVE from this year, 2024, and have found it to be very similar to TunnelCrack LocalNet, and gives two other CVEs from last year. We have determined that from a security and privacy standpoint in relation to the Mulvad VPN app, they are virtually identical. Both attacks rely on the attacker being on the same local network as the victim, and in one way or another being able to act as the victim's DHCP server and tell the victim that some public IP ranges should be routed via the attacker instead of via the VPN tunnel. The desktop versions, Windows, macOS, and Linux, of Mulvad's VPN app have firewall rules in place to block any traffic to public IPs outside the VPN tunnel. These effectively prevent both LocalNet and TunnelVision from allowing the attacker to get hold of plain text traffic from the victim. Android is not vulnerable to TunnelVision simply because it does not implement DHCP Option 121, as explained in the original article about TunnelVision. iOS is unfortunately vulnerable to TunnelVision for the same reason it is vulnerable to LocalNet, as we outlined in our blog post about TunnelCrack. The fix for TunnelVision is probably the same as for LocalNet, but we have not yet been able to integrate and ship that to production. All right, so I will say that I did reach out to Proton informally, and because it was informal, I don't feel comfortable quoting anything here. But I will say that the gist of the response was that the default settings for Proton VPN would avoid this problem, and in particular using WireGuard and their kill switch technology. I have not been able to confirm this. I've been poking around trying to find out whether WireGuard actually is somehow immune to this or mitigates this problem. And WireGuard is a great technology, and it is a default for a lot of the better VPNs, including Proton VPN. So I will be on the lookout for this. But let's back up a little bit. So first of all, this is kind of weird that this even has CVEs associated with it, because it's really not a bug. This is actually a feature of DHCP. It's a very obscure feature, but it is a feature. And basically, your DHCP server is usually run inside your router. And so when you bring a new device onto the Wi-Fi network and it wants to connect and it says, hey, I need a unique IP address. Somebody please give me one. And that somebody is supposed to be the only DHCP server, which is usually running on your router. Now, if somebody were able to compromise your router and therefore compromise the DHCP server, they could, with this special obscure option 121 feature of DHCP, basically trick your device at the operating system level, like below the VPN itself. The VPN is not really even aware of this, to route some traffic in a special way. And in this case, to the rogue DHCP server. And of course, at that point, if it's doing that, it's outside the VPN tunnel and not being encrypted. So what are the chances of that happening? Well, on your home system, it's probably not likely, unless, like I was saying earlier, you've had your router compromised in some way, or some rogue device got on your home network and managed to compromise your router. How likely is that? Probably not very likely. However, where this might come into play is if you were using public Wi-Fi somewhere, and that public Wi-Fi router was compromised. It was either malicious or somebody has hacked into it. So, we're talking Starbucks, McDonald's, hotels, wherever there's a public Wi-Fi server, which is why whenever I am out and about and I want to get on the network with my laptop, I use my phone as a cellular hotspot. I never use public Wi-Fi. Something else this article kind of glossed over was the fact that so many of our connections today are actually HTTPS or TLS based, which means that the individual connections themselves are encrypted, which would make it impossible, even if this technique was used, it would make it impossible to muck with that traffic or see what was going on inside of it. You could find out more metadata about it than you probably should have been able to if it was properly routed through the VPN, but the contents of the communication itself is probably still secure. As it says, Android, for whatever reason, does not implement this option 121, which is actually a failing. I mean, if you're implementing DHCP, that's part of the specifications, and so it's a shortcoming of Android that actually works in your benefit at this case, because it doesn't allow this to happen. Now, there is another way that this could be exploited outside of hacking a router or having a malicious or rogue router and therefore a malicious DHCP server. If somebody else gets on that same network, whips out their laptop or plants this, some sort of an IoT device, a hacking device, and gets on that network, it can pretend to be the DHCP server. And you might think, okay, so now I've got two DHCP servers on one network. Isn't that going to collide and cause problems and wreak havoc? Well, maybe, but the way a lot of this stuff was designed years and years ago was to be more robust rather than secure. And so what really happens is if when somebody, gets on a network and says, hey, I need an IP address, somebody give me one, the first DHCP server to respond to that client, the first response that client gets to that request is the one it's going to honor. So if you have a device that is just really quick with its response and therefore can kind of overtake your client, then it can impose itself as it's a rogue DHCP server and then potentially reroute your VPN traffic. So what do we take from all this? This is a problem. I think VPN clients and services probably should step up their game here. Now, if they're correct in that using things like WireGuard and some of these kill switches and some of these firewall rules that will prevent some of this rerouting of traffic, may be able to mitigate or even prevent these from happening. That's great. I think we'll probably in the coming week or two see some more formal responses from some of the better VPN providers to address this, either with software fixes and or with a blog article saying, yeah, this isn't really a problem for ours, and here's why. But in the meantime, just realize that this has to happen under very special circumstances. It's almost surely not going to happen unless, I guess, some hacker from a long distance somehow manages to compromise routers in public spaces. I suppose that's possible. I do think that VPNs probably need to build in more self-tests for things like this. Like it should be routing some test packets on a periodic basis to make sure that they're being routed the way they think they're being routed. There are sorts of, heuristic things that VPN clients and VPN servers can do when talking to each other to try to make sure that the traffic is being routed the way it's supposed to be routed. I also think at this point, VPNs are becoming so popular and so kind of necessary, unfortunately, in today's world where we have all these public Wi-Fi access spots that we don't want to have to trust, that I think operating system vendors really need to be working with VPN vendors hand in hand to make VPN connections much more secure, much simpler, because they're way too complicated now. And there's way too many nuances of variations and, these things like this option 121. At the very base kernel level of our operating systems, we need to have strong support for VPN connections. All right, just a few more articles here, and these are going to be quick. Both of these next two are from Epic, and they're about 2 new state privacy laws that were passed. So this is all good news. First, the Vermont legislature has passed the Vermont Data Privacy Act, which Epic supported and which represents a significant step forward for state privacy laws. The bill goes further than many existing state privacy laws by including A, data minimization requirements that set meaningful limits on the amount of personal data companies can collect and use, B, a prohibition on the sale of sensitive data, C, strong civil rights protections to prohibit digital discrimination, and D, a limited private right of action that will allow consumers to hold businesses accountable for violations of sensitive data rules. Last year, Epic created the State Data Privacy and Protection Act, modeled on the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, or ADPPA, to give state legislators the opportunity to use the bipartisan consensus language from the ADPPA to strengthen state bills. The Vermont Data Privacy Act pulls many of its strong provisions from that model. The Act's data minimization requirements include limiting the collection of personal data to what is reasonably necessary for the product or service requested by a consumer and processing of personal data in ways that discriminate. Epic recently released the State of Privacy, How State Privacy Laws Fails to Protect Privacy and What They Can Do Better, which found that nearly half of the 14 states that have passed so-called comprehensive privacy laws at the time received a failing grade, and none received an A. State lawmakers from across the country recently testified to Vermont's House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development about how industry lobbying affected their experience championing privacy bills in their states. All right, and this next one is similar, but this one's about Maryland. It says, Governor Wes Moore signed the Maryland Online Data Privacy Act today. This law marks a significant shift in state policy law landscape towards laws that meaningfully limit personal data collection and abuse. Epic testified in support of the bill in both the House and the Senate earlier this spring and attended the bill signing today. And this is a quote from Epic, quote, "The Maryland Online Data Privacy Act sets a new standard for state privacy laws. It requires companies to limit the data they collect to better align with customers' expectations and creates strong civil rights protection online. Maryland's law breaks the trend of states passing weak industry-backed laws and instead provides Marylanders with some of the strongest privacy protections in the country." So yay! Congratulations to both Maryland and Vermont. We are making progress at the state level since we cannot seem to make any progress at the federal level. One more story and then I'll get to my tip of the week. All right, this one's from 9to5Mac. Apple on Monday released iOS 17.5 to iPhone users. The update brings new features to Apple News Plus and also introduces cross-platform tracking detection, an anti-stalking feature announced last year in partnership with Google. Apple and Google announced a partnership in 2023 to work on a new industry specification to address unwanted tracking after many concerns about stalkers using accessories like AirTags to silently track people. 9to5Mac has previously found evidence of this new anti-stalking feature in iOS code, and Apple has now confirmed that the feature has been enabled with iOS 17.5. And this is a quote from Apple. This will help mitigate the misuse of devices designed to help keep track of belongings. Today, Apple is implementing this capability in iOS 17.5, and Google is now launching this capability on Android 6.0 Plus devices, unquote. But exactly how does this new cross-platform tracking detection system work? Just as iOS devices can already detect an unwanted AirTag moving with you, the system will also identify third-party item trackers that use the new protocol. If this happens, the user will get an item found moving with you alert. If a user gets such an alert on their iOS device, it means that someone else's AirTag or Find My accessory or other industry specification compatible Bluetooth tracker is moving with them. The Find My app will help the user find the unwanted item tracker by playing a sound. The app will also provide instructions for disabling the tracker. According to Apple, companies such as Chipolo, Eufy, Geo, Motorola, and Pebblebee have already committed to making their future accessories compatible with this new protocol. Make sure you update your iPhone and iPad to the latest version of iOS in order to be notified of unwanted items tracking you. So yeah, that's great. This is something I reported on way back when they announced they were going to be doing this. I'm very happy that they've worked together and collaborated to create this anti-stalking feature because honestly, I love AirTags. I use them all the time. I've given them out as gifts. They are really, really handy at tracking your stuff, luggage, backpacks, things like that, purses, keys, even things like bikes. Like if your bike gets stolen, you can hide one of these things up under the seat and help find your bike. They are wonderful. But of course, like any technology, they can and have been abused to, track and stalk people. So this technology basically comes up with a standard for all of these kind of trackers, not just ones made by the same company that makes your smartphone. They've come up with a standard now that as soon as everybody, implements and puts into their tracking products, that will allow iPhones and iPads and other Apple devices and other Android devices to notice if there is one of these tracking devices moving around with you, like following you, and it's not one that it knows about. And it sounds like part of the protocol is if it's given the directive to do so, it will force these things to make a noise so that you can find them and figure out, where these tracking devices are. And as part of this specification, I believe it also has to have a way to disable the tracker. Once you found the device, you can disable it, which is great. That's fantastic. And it was great to see these guys working together on this. And I'm looking forward to seeing this roll out to all these devices. Okay, so now let's get to my tip of the week. And this was driven by something that I heard on a different podcast. It was on Security Now. And this researcher had found a bunch of PIN codes from data breaches. And basically went through and looked for these unique codes throughout a bunch of data breach data and did some analysis on PIN codes, these 4-digit personal identifying numbers that we use for, ATMs, locks, smartphone access codes, and things like that, and did some analysis on these PIN codes. And there's a picture that you really kind of need to see to appreciate. And so if you go to my blog on this, you'll find it there. It's a heat map of these values. And the way the person plotted these 4-digit PIN codes was by breaking them down into the first two numbers and the last two numbers, the first two digits and the last two digits. So, down one side, the rows were labeled with numbers 00 through 99. And then the columns on the bottom, across the bottom, were labeled 00 to 99. So, the very lower left, that would correspond to PIN code 0000. The very upper right would correspond to PIN code 9999. And as you look at this heat map of popularity of chosen codes among these, I think it was 3.4 million PIN codes that were in this data set, What this researcher found was a couple very interesting trends. First of all, there's a bright diagonal line from the lower left to the upper right, which corresponds to all those codes I just mentioned, where the first two digits and the last two digits were the same. So 0000, 1111, 5555, but also, like 5252 or 9191, anything where the first two numbers and the last two numbers were the same. That's what that diagonal would represent on that chart. So there's a bright line there. People like to use simple codes. But one of the other really interesting patterns that you saw in there was a bright line toward the last half of the row that represented the first two digits 19. And you're probably already realizing why. Because what is a very popular 4-digit number, something that we all kind of know off the top of our head? A year, in particular, a birth year. Whether it be ours or our kids, or maybe an anniversary, dates are meaningful. And for people living right now, the meaningful dates tend to be from the late 1900s. So a lot of people pick 19 followed by some number, probably 50 and up, to be their PIN code. And the other hot area of this map was a rectangular region toward the lower left, which represents another form of date, which is month and day. So, between starting numbers 1 and 12, which are the month numbers, up through 1 through 31, which are the month days, there are a lot of those in that realm as well. So the first thing to take away from this on how to choose a PIN number is how not to choose a PIN number. And basically, in all cases, not just PIN numbers, but also in passwords, the real goal is you want to pick something that is not guessable. Yes, we always harp on things like make it long, use multiple different character types. But for example, if I know you're a huge Taylor Swift fan and your password is, Taylor Swift 1989 exclamation point. That's long. It's got both capital and lower letters in it. It's got numbers in it. It's got special characters in it. But it's guessable. It's not a good password. Similarly, you don't want to pick PIN codes that are easy to guess. One of the other stunning statistics from this, when he actually just looked at the numbers, was password 1234 represented, no kidding, 10.7% of all 3.4 million passwords. That's like almost 11% of this entire 3.4 million passcode database. The chosen one, by far, was 1234. Number 2 was 1111. That took up another 6%. So those two PIN codes, just by themselves, made up almost 17% of all of these. If you look at the top 20, there's a lot of repeated numbers in there. There's a lot of those 1-2 patterns I was telling you about, like 2121. If you just looked at the top 20, that made up 27% of all of the choices. And I'm sure if you started throwing in things like years after 1950 and things like that, it would also go way up. So when picking a PIN code or picking a password, though today we're talking about PIN codes, you really have to think like an attacker. If I knew anything about you whatsoever, and I could do that by following you on social media, and I could do that without actually being in your friend group or something. I mean, I could just follow you on social media, right? And I could probably figure out your birthday, your anniversary, your kids' birthdays. Those would all be the first thing I would try for any PIN code. Maybe for your front door smart lock. If I stole your ATM card, your ATM code. If I stole your phone, I might try that for a 4-digit PIN. There's also a lot of just open source intelligence, OSINT, where I could find a lot of these kind of numbers like past addresses, past phone numbers, past zip codes. Right? So there's lots of ways to find these numbers that people love to use for PIN codes. And I think people do this more with PIN codes than they do with passwords because numbers are not really words, right? They're just kind of harder to remember. You have to remember all the individual digits unless they mean something to you. So how do you pick a good PIN code? Well, if it's just 4 digits, you could just suck it up and memorize the 4 digits. Also, you could use like a telephone keypad and use letters and map those letters to digits. Now, unfortunately, that means that your PIN code digits will only be between 2 and 9 because on the classic telephone keypad, 1 and 0 don't have any letters on them. Now, you could also try using a number that doesn't really fit the PIN code. Like if it's a 4-digit PIN code, you could maybe use the last 4 digits of an old phone number you had. That's getting a little bit more obscure. But what I would do if you really want to find something that you can remember is pick a number that you can pull off the top of your head, but that nobody else would associate with you. So maybe it's, let's say you happen to remember the phone number of your best friend from middle school, or the address of a lake cottage you used to visit that was somebody else's property. If you really need to find something to remember, just pick something that nobody's going to associate with you, and therefore is something they're not going to be able to just look up on your social media or look up in some public record. I will say that on smartphones, and I think this is the default now for both iPhone and Android, they require usually a 6-digit code. If you've either got an old phone where it's still 4 digits and you've just kind of inherited that as you've upgraded your phone over the years, or if you've manually set that back down to 4, bump it back up to at least 6. That just makes it harder. The other thing to remember about PIN codes is the threat model is different than with passwords. In most cases, PIN codes require you to be physically with whatever this device is, either at the ATM machine, or you've stolen somebody's phone, you're trying to get into it, or at someone's front door or garage where you're entering a code. That makes it harder. And also, like for example, with your smartphone, they are programmed to start making it progressively longer before you can enter a PIN code if you've had too many successive failures. So the threat model is a little bit different. You don't have to be as hyper secure as you might be with a password, for example. But still, you could be a little smarter than just using your birth year. One other thing I will say is if you have a physical keypad, like on a garage door or on a smart lock, I would change that PIN code periodically because you're going to wear out the buttons that correspond to your PIN code. So all someone's really got to do is look at that keypad and see which of those numbers are most worn, and that will significantly reduce the number of choices they have to pick your PIN code. All right, so there you have it. There is your news and your tip of the week. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this week. My voice is starting to get a little hoarse, actually, so I'm going to call it quits for now. Next week, we'll have my wonderful interview with Naomi Brockwell. That was a lot of fun. Can't wait for you to hear that. I'm working on a bunch of other interviews. I got several of them being recorded here in the next few weeks. I'm interviewing 2 different authors. I'm talking to an expert on open source intelligence. I'll be talking with somebody who actually specializes in keeping kids safe online. And we'll also be talking about some really cool privacy-enhancing technologies and what's really going on behind the scenes in the privacy space inside Google. So lots of great stuff coming up. Subscribe if you haven't. That way you won't miss any of that. All right, take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.